Welcome to the Evolving Digital Self podcast, where we explore the conscious use of technology. Listen in to hear thought leaders and other guests discuss the human relationship with technology and learning to thrive in the digital era. Hosted by the author of the international best-selling Digital Self-Mastery series and Being at Work, Dr. Heidi Forbes Öste.
Welcome back to the Evolving Digital Self podcast. My name is Dr. Heidi Forbes Öste, and today I am so excited to share with you my initial inspiration on podcasting and America's reinvention expert, Steve Olsher. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thanks for having me, Doc.
You know, Steve, I just have such an amazing appreciation for what you do in your work and in the way that you share and use technology to expand your horizons and expand other people's horizons. And I'm so excited to have you come and tell us a little bit about your story and how technology has enhanced your life and maybe some places where it's caused some hiccups in the process too. So thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here, and I'm happy that we got technology worked out so I can actually see you and you can see me and people can hear us. So all good on that front.
Yeah, what a treat. I mean, if you think about it, both you and I have been in this space for quite a while. We don't need to expose our ages, but certainly we've seen a lot of change over that course, and just being able to visually see each other is quite exciting. I remember early days where it was exciting to see text. So
you're right.
Especially when it was actually moving. You know,
wait, I'm sorry. Hold on. I got to go get my facts. Hold on. It's yeah. I know, right? Got to reload the thermal paper.
Exactly. I mean, you know, you're coming back from some really early days with, you know, we talk a lot about sort of the pioneering, and I think you mentioned something about sort of being involved in CompuServe, electronic mall in 1993. Yeah. So, I mean, that's telling a little bit dating sort of where we were at with technology back there. How has your relationship with technology changed since then?
It's interesting. The days of CompuServe, of course, were some pretty interesting days, and launching in '93 on their electronic mall was definitely interesting. And I will say that I remember quite vividly the days of waiting for a fairly small, maybe let's just call it a 240 by 240 image of a bottle of wine to load, and kind of getting to the point where almost by the top of the label, I knew whether or not I wanted to see any more of that picture, right? So it's just funny how let's just call it what it is, spoiled we are insofar as how fast everything is now. I think that's just really one of the biggest changes, is just having access to whatever it is that we need in such an expedited period of time. And I mean, literally, when you think about the volumes upon volumes of information that are available to you in literally a split second, it's pretty mind-blowing. And just being able to watch that evolve over the past 25 years has really been pretty interesting, no doubt.
Yeah. And I mean, it's really, you know, when you look at some of the things that you've done, you've been really on the cutting edge of exploring different ways to use technology, and ways to, you know, sort of evolve your own business in that process.
Yeah.
What do you think has been sort of your biggest personal trigger in terms of that? Is it curiosity, or is it, you know, what do you think that is for you?
Yeah, it's just a matter of really taking action, I think, on an intuitive level, on sort of an instinctual level. I mean, there were lots of folks who had discs from CompuServe and lots of folks who had discs from Prodigy and AOL and so on. But there weren't a lot of people who decided, hey, you know, I'm gonna get involved in this world from a business perspective. It was a nice little entertainment thing, but from a business perspective, it wasn't like, this is something I absolutely have to do. And for me, that's kind of how it was. It was just always something like I felt like I had to do. And I don't know if it's just being aware of kind of where trends are going and reading publications and articles from people that talk about where trends are going, or what it is. But I've always had that sense of where things are headed, and from a business perspective, just feeling like I need to be a part of that bleeding edge. And unfortunately, I will be the first to admit, though, that I've not always taken action when I've seen the writing on the wall from a technology standpoint. Most recent case actually being Bitcoin, which I'm sure you've heard quite a bit about lately if you've been alive.
Got a little FOMO going on there?
Oh, man. So so true story. I mean, we actually did build one of the first fully functional e-commerce sites in 1995. So, I mean, definitely saw that writing. But, with Bitcoin as an example, and even with podcasting, I mean, let's just stay the course here with the discussion around podcasting. I did my first podcast in 2009. And actually had a pretty decent thing going with podcasting, and got that what is it? It's I guess it's, what's the best way to put it? It's I got that affliction that so many of us are subjected to when we get into something, where we don't get the results we want as quickly as we want them, and that results in giving up. And that's what happened. I mean, by 2010, I was like, there aren't that many people listening to the show, and it's just kind of heading in a direction I don't necessarily like, and it's taking a lot of time and energy and some resources. So I stopped, and I look back on it, some of the folks who started around the same time I did, and what they've been able to do with their podcast simply by staying the course. And it's a little shocking, really, what might have happened with podcasting specifically had I stayed the course. But for the better part of 2.5 years now, we've been publishing almost daily.
Wow. For a little background for those of you listening, so I met Steve at this amazing event that he coordinated and hosted, and it was just it was incredible. It was called the New Media Summit. And definitely going back, can't wait to share it with all of you, of anybody that's interested in either being a guest on a podcast or hosting a podcast. It was just an incredible environment for really learning about the industry and really understanding sort of the community around it, which was really profound for me, something that I hadn't anticipated. And you didn't have to be a techie to get excited about that. And that's something that I really love, because with my work, it's really about finding ways that technology becomes integrated without thinking about it as technology. It just seamlessly fits into your life. And when I first saw you speak on a stage at Alina Vincent's event, the thing that really popped out for me was you were talking about podcast accessibility. And like you were saying, you started a podcast in 2009. Well, then people didn't know where to find podcasts. Yeah. And when I saw you speak on that stage, we had actually just gotten a new car that has Apple Play,
CarPlay, yeah.
CarPlay. And the podcast icon was there. And I thought, wow, like it just connected for me of like, there's all these people that have never listened to a podcast before that are all of a sudden saying, hey, what's that? Then pushing on that icon and going, well, I got to fill it up with good content. Where's this content coming from?
Yep.
And that was a really profound moment for me. And I am a tech geek, but I'm thinking like my father could do this.
He could. Everybody can, right? Yeah. It was. It was great having you at the event. Look forward to having you at the next one. And truth of the matter is, it's definitely something that anyone can do, and a lot of podcasts were started as a result of coming to that event. And there's a lot of interesting things going on, certainly by the attendees. But I don't want people to get the wrong impression here about the medium itself, because what I did, I think in 2009, 2010, is I kind of looked at it and said, hey, this is a business opportunity, and I wanted to actually make a business out of it. And I think for some, and I mean of just a very small fractional amount of people, that's possible. But I do think for most everyone else, that it should be looked at as a complementary tool to your current marketing initiatives and your overall plan. It's really a piece of that plan. And that was the mistake that I made back in 2009, 2010, was looking at it as the business itself. And I think that if you look at it that way, you're going to be gravely disappointed. But if you look at it as a tool to leverage, to drive traffic and to secure leads and really highly targeted, highly qualified prospects for your products, programs, and services, then you're probably going about it, in my way of thinking, the right way.
Yeah, no, I'm totally with you on that. I agree 100%. I think that there's, it's about creating content that's relevant, that really helps people understand what it is that you do, what kind, how you can really, how you can serve them better. That's not the service in itself. It's really about, aggregating content, and whether that aggregation comes from bringing in interesting speakers that add value to your clients or to your listeners, or to just spread the word. And I think that there's so much to that, whether it's coming through a book or a combination of a book and a podcast and various other ways. There's so many different ways to reach people now that you have to reach them by the medium that resonates for them.
Yeah, and it's complementary from the standpoint of, if somebody is reading your book, then you can drive them to your podcast, or you can drive them to your blog, or whatever it might be. If someone's reading your blog, you can drive them to your podcast, or you can drive them to your videos. I mean, whatever it might be. So I just think that one absolutely can drive the other. And when you come right down to it, most of the time you're not going to get the same person consuming the exact same content in multiple ways. You're going to be reaching different people who are consuming the exact same content in different ways. In other words, you got to meet people where they are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it sort of goes back to, the work that your book that I love, What is Your What, where it's really figuring out what is that thing that you are so, you are the person to deliver that thing, and then finding the different mediums that you can share that what with other people. Yeah. And really that is the core question, especially in this landscape, that you have to be able to answer. If you're not familiar with the What is Your What book or the What is Your What framework, basically it's comprised of three very specific pieces. One being your core gift, which is really just reflective of how you're naturally wired to excel, whether it's through communicating or teaching or enrolling or protecting or entertaining. I mean, whatever that core gift is for you, we all have it. I mean, we have that one core gift. And the second part of the framework are the vehicle, right? What's the primary vehicle that you're going to use to share that gift? And then the third piece of the puzzle are the people. And really understanding the people that you're most compelled to serve. And so once you have the understanding of those three pieces, then you really have what you need to put together this whole What is Your What framework. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when you think about getting into this medium, if you're going to get into podcasting, what certainly makes the most sense for me is to really think about the people that you're most compelled to serve and what the problems are that they face, or what's most important to them, and create a show that really focuses on that. Because when you look at your CarPlay dashboard, you can push the podcast icon, but the real question is, what shows are you going to find? And the majority of the time, you're going to find the shows that are already immensely popular. So if you're going to start your own show, getting discovered is super hard to do. So that's a whole other dance. Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of different pieces to that, because there's the human factor of people sharing it and connecting to it. But ultimately we're sort of at the mercy of the hosting tools that decide, what they're going to promote to the top and what not. And some of it is algorithms based, but some of it is, have other factors behind it. So I'm curious for you, because you have been working more on the side of the, helping people understand, helping organizations understand how to use these new tools and these new media outlets. Do you ever come across sort of the anxiety around technology, or the other where they're sort of, I got to have all the different technologies to make this work, but they never actually put it into action because, they're more on the hoarding side of, I've got to have the best mic and I've got to have this and I've got to have that, but then they never launch their show. Or the other way around, like, I can't do this. This is too technical.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think that technology, no matter how you slice it, is not second nature, right? For any of us. It's just not. And so there's always going to be a learning curve. There's always going to be some degree of difficulty in gaining comfort with that particular medium or with that particular piece of technology. So, yeah, it's wow. It's one of those things where if I was 5 years old at this point, I think I'd have a much better, just the advantages of being born into technology. I mean, are just so, you can't even put a number on it in terms of how big of a difference it really makes in terms of where we are as adults now, older folk, right? I mean, who are trying to kind of play catch up, for lack of a better term. I mean, this is all new to us. It's not something that we grew up with. I mean, when you come right down to it, the internet itself is something that the majority of us of our generation really didn't take hold of until our 20s. Versus the 20s and even late teens and 30s, whatever. It doesn't matter. But the point being, we didn't grow up with this in terms of it just being a part of our lives. I mean, I remember getting my first cell phone, and that was I want to say that was around 95, maybe something like that. Maybe like around 95, somewhere in there. And so today, I mean, kids have not just phones. I mean, my first phone, probably like yours, was actually a phone. Like, that's what it did. Like, it called people.
If you were within range.
If you were within range, right? And now, I mean, my youngest, who just turned 11, I think the first phone he had was like an iPhone 5 or 6, something like that, right? And it was just an unbelievable difference. So, yeah, technology to us can still be, it can still be a huge barrier. It can still be a huge, the learning curve is real. And a lot of us just don't have the patience. We get to that point where we're just like, I'm too old for this nonsense, and that's real, and you give up.
Well, let's hope they don't give up, but they at least find the ones that work well for them.
Yeah.
Ultimately. So going to the smartphone, because it is such a dynamic device, I guess is the easiest way to describe it. It's far more.
It's a supercomputer. I mean,
it's a supercomputer.
Yeah,
exactly. And yet it is a supercomputer that is one of the most intimate objects that we have a relationship with in our lives these days. And so it's, we use it for everything from our personal to our business to just general lifestyle, health and wellness and whatnot. What are some of your favorite apps for some of those different categories? So, for example, do you use any apps for health and wellness?
Yeah, I can honestly say I don't. I mean, I don't track my steps. I don't do any of that. Nothing. The closest I come is like through Instagram or something like that, where I see pictures of people who have good health and have good wellness. And I'm looking at them going, yes, you have good health and you have good wellness. That is great. And so I'm sure there's an app for that. And maybe that's what I should just do, is create an app for the rest of us where we can or I guess that already exists with Instagram. So there you go.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, that's about as close as I come.
Well, but does it make you happy?
No, it makes me very different. I mean, it's like, watching other people actually care about their health and their fitness and their lives in a meaningful way. It's pretty inspiring. And then I figure out how I can drive from the couch to the refrigerator. And I've actually got one of those, those Hyperloop things that Elon Musk is building. Mm-hmm. I actually have one of those in my house.
There's your tech.
Exactly. It connects the couch to the refrigerator. It's pretty sweet, actually.
So one of those like suction tubes that just
exactly
like they used to have in the banks. You remember those?
Yes, that's exactly. I just sit in that and just flings me towards the fridge. I open the fridge, get what I buy, and then close it back up, and then it flings me back to the couch. Awesome.
That is funny. I'm just have like an actual visual in my mind of what that's looking like. And anyway,
that's me. That's as close as I come to apps for health and fitness. Yes.
So where do you see this stuff going? Do you think podcasting is it, or what's going to be next?
Look, I don't know if we're going to continue to call it podcasting. We'll probably just move to calling it what it is, which is just audio. I mean, much as, Gary Vee has been doing with the audio experience or whatever he calls it. I will say that just when you think about audio as a medium, obviously it's the only medium where you can consume and do something else at the same time, right? I mean, you can't really read and do something else. You can't really watch a video and do something else, but you can listen to a show and do other things. You can work out, you can drive, you can whatever, right? I mean, there's a million things you can do while you're listening. So from that standpoint, I just think that what we're going to be looking at is not necessarily the demise of podcasting, so to speak, but just really the growth of audio as a consumable, transferable, and transportable medium, right? Where people will just have the ability to listen to what they want, when they want, on their preferred device. And with AI coming into the game here as quickly as it is, I just think what you're going to see is a lot of deliverability, basically technology delivering to you what it is that you say that you want in terms of the keywords that you put in, or the requests, or the categories, or the genres, etc. So I think that it's just going to change in terms of its delivering device, if you will. What that looks like specifically, I don't know. But with the Internet of Things and everything being tied together, one might think that it could just simply play through your refrigerator, and who knows, right? But I think as all the devices become more and more connected, and certainly you have the ability to interact and not only speak to the devices, but hear the devices, I think that you're going to see just the deliverability of that media changing insofar as I think we move away from these headphones and something else takes its place. But I think AI is going to have a lot to do with how things evolve.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that we'll ever get to a state where it might be a bi-directional exchange within the podcast where you can interact with the podcast in a different way?
Well, I mean, I think that, and it's funny because it kind of goes back to blurring the lines then between traditional radio and broadcast media with what I would call the pull media being podcasting, and the consumer pulling that episode when they want it and consuming it when they want it and on their preferred device. So it's from a feedback standpoint, yeah. I mean, I can certainly see from a feedback standpoint going bi-directional and being able to give feedback to the podcast host in an easier way. And I would certainly think from a bi-directional standpoint, just in terms of being able to communicate with the audience in a different way, I think will be a part of that as well. Because, right now, there are folks listening to this episode who you have no idea who they are. Right? I mean, and that is the one downside of this medium from a broadcaster, perspective, is we really don't know who's listening. We really have no means with which to truly cultivate a meaningful relationship with that person unless we take them into a different medium online. Email marketing usually is the way that ends up. So I do think that there is the potential for having a different dialogue with that podcast host, whether or not the podcaster will go to live. I don't know. I mean, we do our show as a live radio show, and then we repurpose it as a podcast. So it's certainly possible that live and bidirectional communication may come more into play. But that's going to require people to be at a specific place at a specific time. And I think that kind of defeats the purpose. Yeah,
it's true. Then you lose that flexibility of time and space that podcasting really provides. I mean, here I am, sitting in my office, my home office studio where I'm looking at the Golden Gate Bridge, and you're down in San Diego. Not sure what your view is, but it's different, certainly. And yet we're able to have a real-time conversation that will be shared with many people in some other time. So it's really one of the most beautiful gifts, I think, that technology has provided us, is that we have this incredible reach that is not limited by time and space.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. And that's the challenge, is how do you balance the two? And to that end, a lot of people have been calling for the death of radio for quite some time, and I'm not sure that's going to be the case.
Yeah, I think it'll just evolve. I'm kind of with you on that one. I like my radio too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just such a fascinating space, and I just, before we go into our next segment, I just want to make sure that we take a little time to get a little visit from our sponsor. So if you bear with me for a moment, we'll be right back. This episode of The Evolving Digital Self is sponsored by Good Idea. Good Idea is the Swedish Sugar Buster. It's a scientifically proven dietary supplement designed to go perfectly with any meal. The big deal is that Good Idea, the Swedish Sugar Buster, contains a blend of 5 amino acids and a mineral in sparkling water that helps those with normal blood sugar levels handle the sugar spike following a meal. And it works with any meal containing fast carbs and or sugar. That's why Good Idea, the Swedish Sugar Buster, might well be your best lunch date ever. And the one you can have every day. Available now on Amazon.com. For more information, go to goodideadrinks.com. Welcome back to the Evolving Digital Self podcast, and we are joined today by Steve Olsher. We're having a great conversation talking about the future of podcasting and the future of how we get our content out in many different ways with technology. As we're moving into the next space, I would love to get some ideas from you, Steve, about, so what do you see? What would be if your wish list of the best tools that would make it possible for us to have a really quality reach with our customers and our clients that we don't have today? What would be your dream technology?
That's an interesting question, right? From a technology standpoint, it's hard to fathom what we need that we don't currently have, right? The only thing that I will say is, having done a speaking gig in LA yesterday, I think technology has to do something around transportation, right? Which is clearly something that we're working on. So there's that, and being able to get from point A to point B much, much faster. But I think they're even talking about, I forget the company. God knows it's probably Elon Musk, but there is a company that is working on, I forget exactly what they call it, but there's a level between, I'm not a scientist, but there's a level between the stratosphere and the atmosphere or something like that, where you're kind of off of the Earth's surface, but you're not like way out in space. And so they're doing these little rocket ship kind of thingies where you can go from like New York to Shanghai in like 23 minutes or something like that. So that will be super cool, because God knows the way we go from point A to point B really needs to evolve. But outside of that, when you come right down to it, we can communicate with almost anyone on the planet, from almost anywhere on the planet, right? And so it's just hard to fathom what else we really need at this point, other than some better sense of creating community online, and some degree of togetherness. And I think that always has room for evolution in terms of creating a space for people to connect with like-minded people not in a more formal way, but certainly in a way where people have more sort of real life interaction without actually being together in real life. And so I don't know what that looks like, but if you want to go home and join your folks for Christmas dinner and you weren't able to make it there, to be at that table and be with them, sort of through holographics or the robots. I know there's some of those that are out and about, but I think there's some evolution there. Where you can literally be in the same place as someone else. So maybe something on those fronts.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I don't know if you've tested yet, but I've seen, there's been a lot of information about the simultaneous translation devices. And I think that they're, just being able to reach larger audiences who maybe just have it's simply a communication issue of they don't speak the same language. I mean, we are very fortunate because we come from, we were born into an English-speaking culture, and English is so widely used, particularly on the internet, that we have access to so much information. But think about all those people that don't have that advantage when they're coming into it, to be able to have access to all of this wealth of knowledge that's out there. And it's funny you say that about the holograph, because I remember asking my son, who's now 16, I think he was probably around 10, what he thought the world would be like in 20 years. And he said, I'll be hanging out with my friends as holograms. And at the time I was like, well, that's pretty cool. Like, wonder if we'll get that far. Well, it's only 6 years later. There's a good chance. I do think that, there's a clear possibility that in 14 years we could hang out with our friends as holograms, but it's it's got to be the adaptation that works on a smaller scale or on a large scale and whatnot. But it's pretty cool stuff. We do that sort of with FaceTime.
We do. But some sort of physical presence where you can actually see what's going on through your own eyes as opposed to through their camera and through what they show you. That's I think that's probably the evolution.
Very cool stuff. Now, I'm going to ask you a question here that's a little more on the woo-woo side, just because there's this funny piece with the digital self, or maybe funny is the wrong word, that I work with on clients where it's helping them build more of a conscious relationship with their technology, more just acknowledging how they engage with it. And I'm always surprised. It never fails to surprise me who relates to that and who doesn't, because it's usually the people that I think that are going to go, wow, this is way too woo-woo, that are totally into it. And there's others that I assume that they're going to totally get that part. And they're sort of like, wow, it's too weird. Do you feel like you have a pretty conscious relationship with how you engage with your technology, or is it just, a physical thing that you have to deal with on a daily basis?
I'm definitely more in the latter category than the former. I don't know. I'm not one to look at things, I think, on more of that kind of spiritual level, if you will. I don't know. I mean, I think that there's so many amazing things about what we do and how we do it. But at the same token, when you look at how it's done, obviously there's a huge capitalism piece tied to it. And it's kind of hard to wrap my arms around something being done simply for the sake of it, making the world a better place from a spiritual perspective, versus just someone creating a technology where that demand has literally made them tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, even billions of dollars. I just think it's all for, at least in my cynical mind, I think it's driven strictly by what can be done from a business perspective. I just don't. I think there are people who adapt technologies to take more of that spiritual type approach to what it can do and how it can be leveraged in that manner. But the technology itself, it's tied too strongly to business for me to feel differently about it.
Well, you're an entrepreneur, so do you use your technology all the time, or do you have periods where you put it to bed and then so that you can actually have offline time or disconnected time?
I'm certainly guilty of being pretty connected most of the time. So we try in the family to keep the dinner table free of technology and keep the TV off, but and keep the phones away from the table. But even sometimes that doesn't work. So it's it's tricky, but I wish it hasn't. In a lot of ways, I'm glad it's a part of our lives and so on. But I think there are definitely times where I wish that the kids could just learn how to talk to each other again and stop texting and Snapchatting, or as I call it, snapagramming and Insta chatting with people and that sort of thing. And I don't know. I guess for us again as those who grew up without it. I just kind of feel like we know to some extent how to actually interact and balance and have a decent balanced life, even though the phone may still be in our pocket, versus, my kids who are growing up with the technology. And I'm just not sure that they're going to have the same degree of communication skills and connection skills as those who have come in the generations before them.
Do you think the kids are antisocial, or do you think they socialize in a different way?
I just think that they're still. It's not an antisocial thing. I think the social element is still there, but I think it's more of the communication element that's lacking, in terms of knowing how to actually address conflict and know how to actually just have a meaningful discussion with someone that's not broken down into SMH and LOLs and these sort of things. So that's more of my concern, is just being able to verbally express themselves when they're actually face to face with someone.
No, I hear you, and I think it's a whole nother topic. Actually, my next book is really looking at across generations and digital self-mastery, and I think what's been fascinating for me is to see that a lot of the things that we relate to as antisocial or not such good social behavior, it's actually at least in the interviews I've done thus far, it sort of matches their developmental stage. There's sort of a period there where, particularly the boys, when they're sort of 13 to 15, you're lucky if you get sort of a monosyllabic grunt when you ask them questions.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to blame that on they've got their nose in their Snapchat. And then all of a sudden, the 16-year-old comes out with a full sentence and you say, well, how did you learn to talk? Because the last 2 years I haven't heard you say anything.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's hard to recognize as parents and, as adults, sort of what is a developmental stage and what is just the tools that are being distraction. Or the other thing that I see a lot is, the adults that have their noses buried in their devices and they're telling their children, put your device away. It's sort of this, let's see, are they modeling behavior? So, just interesting things to keep in mind when we are concerned with our children being buried in. That's not to say that there shouldn't be certain boundaries that we need to learn so that it doesn't disrupt social skills. But I think there's a lot of interesting points in there. Now, before I forget, I want to make sure that if people want to learn more about what you do and how to potentially work with you, if they can find you, how do they do that? And what can they do? What kinds of things are you doing now that people can reach out to you about?
Yeah, so of course, Steve Olsher, OLSHER.com is a great place to go. On the podcasting front, Reinvention Radio is the name of our show, and we cover a lot of ground there, from business to technology to politics. You name it. I think we've covered it on the show, and we always have really, really interesting guests on who have reinvented their lives in one way or another. So certainly recommend Reinvention Radio. And then you talked about the New Media Summit, so perhaps you can share a way for folks to find out more information through you on the summit.
Absolutely. Well, all of those things will have information in the show notes. So if you're curious about that, you can go over to tobalanceyou.com or to the podcast hosting site, and there'll be links there to find Steve and to be able to join us at the New Media Summit. I'll be there, and lots of other people that have also been on my podcast. So I think there'll be some really good conversations. I look forward to attending it as a podcaster rather than a potential guest this time. I'll be coming with a different lens. It'll be fun.
Awesome.
It'll be fun. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Steve. Do you have any final words that you'd like to share with the audience?
I would just simply say, much like our discussion around podcasting and even touching on Bitcoin a little bit earlier, and who knows, maybe by the time, because obviously the beautiful thing about podcasting is it lives on, and these episodes live on in perpetuity. So, if you're listening to this episode and the year is 2022, who knows what's going on in Bitcoin. But at this point, I would just simply say this, which is, based on what we were talking about earlier with podcasting and with cryptocurrency, just the whole idea of really getting started today is definitely something to live by, because reality is, in my mind, is that a year from now, you'll look back and really wish you had gotten started today. There's just no other way around it. So whatever it is that you're thinking about doing, just do it, get that first version done, get it out. And like Doc said here, you come back to the New Media Summit next time and you'll have a whole fresh set of eyes on it, but you had to come the first time in order to get this new set of eyes. So yeah, just jump in and get started, and it's going to suck at first, and it's going to probably be not nearly as good as you want it to be, and you're going to look back and go, geez, that was pretty bad. But it had to be in order for you to get to where you really want to go. Yep.
It's an evolution. That's what we're all about.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Steve Olsher. And for those of you listening for the first time, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, and join us again and share the podcast. We look forward to joining you again with the Evolving Digital Self. This is Dr. Heidi Forbes Öste, and I want to thank you for today and signing off for now. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Evolving Digital Self. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app now so that you don't miss a single episode. While you're at it, please give us a rating and a review, and join the Digital Self-Mastery movement to create more conscious use of technology by sharing it and telling your friends. Want to see where you fit on the digital self spectrum and how it might be impacting your business and relationships? Get your free copy of Digital Self-Mastery today by clicking on the link in the show notes.